during this meeting. However, the presentations were provided in advance and the public was able to provide comments to the RAC prior to this meeting. I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting and the agenda for this meeting. We have a motion from Ken and a second from Ben Louder. All in favor? Aye. Chase, I guess I get to call you out each time. He raised his hands, and Luke Decker is online as well. Luke, are you good with that?
I am. Thank you. Apologies for not being in person tonight.
No problem, Luke.
Brock, this is AJ. I'm here also.
Oh, AJ, great. It just shows, I should have known your name, but it shows Ashton, and I'm used to calling you AJ. So
I know. I'm sorry, but I'm here. I approve.
Great. So I think we have everybody. Excellent. Now we do. Okay. So I'll turn the time over right now to Jason to give a brief update of the Central Region.
All right, thanks, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it. And I want to echo what Brock said previously. Just on behalf of myself and the division, just welcome back, everyone. It's good to have everybody here and in this public process. And it's a little bit more difficult through the internet and online and streaming, but we're back and hopefully we're here for it to stay. A couple things I want to report from the Central Region that's happened over the last several months. In our wildlife section, we're in the middle of both elk and pronghorn classifications. Spent some time up on Wasatch last week and Manti the previous week, and excited to see some elk up there. And at the same time, our biologists are monitoring the range conditions up there, and we've seen lots of reports about the drought. I think on most of our ranges in the Central Region, at least these two main ranges, we're seeing some good afternoon thunder showers the last couple of weeks, and we're starting to see some decent green up at the higher elevations. So we're excited about that, and I know our biologists are as well. From our aquatic section, again with the drought, our biologists are monitoring streams and water bodies, see how those look for the fish. Some of that, it's kind of a twofold monitoring process. Some of it is to help prepare for the future. We're seeing some of our reservoirs get down to the lowest levels we've ever seen them. And so we're going out and measuring how much water is in there, acre feet and depth on those, so that in the future we can make good recommendations if we see a drought coming again to understand what we can handle in those reservoirs. And then the other information with that is has to do with emergency regulation changes. We've seen two changes, emergency regulation changes come through so far this year. Tomorrow, our director will be signing a third round of emergency regulation changes for water bodies throughout the state. In our region, we have 5 water bodies that are going to have changes on them. 2 of them in Utah County, which is Payson Lake, the Big East Lake at Payson Lakes, and McClellan Reservoirs. Down in Sanpete, Fairview Lakes, Town Reservoir, and Palisades Reservoir. And then in Juab County, Mona Reservoir. So look for those changes, and it's awesome to be able to get out and get those fish, and now's a great time to get them out of those waters and help us out. Over the last year with COVID, it's been really challenging for our outreach section to get out and interact with the public and our constituents. That's starting to change quite a bit. So we're starting to get some more in-person seminars out there. Right now, one of the ones we're planning for has been a really popular one in the past, and it's the kokanee salmon viewing day up at Strawberry Reservoir. And we're hopeful that nothing changes and we're able to get up there and show off those fish. Again, there's a challenge with water and fish. So this one kind of gets hit a double whammy from COVID as well. So if you haven't been up to Strawberry during Strawberry or the kokanee salmon viewing, I sure would encourage you to do that. It's a pretty amazing sight. And finally, with our habitat section, again, it's everything seems to be related to drought. They spent a lot of time out on the West Desert looking at the guzzlers we have out there. We had not a lot of rain and snow this last winter and not a lot of water, it seems like, in some of those areas on the West Desert. But it's amazing how much, even when we get a little bit, those guzzlers seem to fill up and they start to get pretty full. We have hauled water to a few guzzlers that have been drunk dry, I guess, by a few species out there, mostly elk. They seem to go through water pretty quickly, but we're keeping an eye on that and making sure that those guzzlers are full and providing the moisture, the water that those animals need. With that, Brock, I'll turn the time back over to you unless there's any questions from the RAC.
Any questions from the RAC? Okay, I'll provide a brief update from the last board meeting. If you recall, it started with the waterfowl rule amendments. There was a motion to approve the division's recommendations as presented, and that motion failed due to lack of a second. And then there was a motion to establish a special use permit for guided waterfowl hunting on the waterfowl management units for 2021 season. And the guides who guide on WMAs need to apply for that permit, and that motion passed unanimously. And then there was a motion to form a working group to establish guiding rules and regulations on licensing waterfowl guides for the state of Utah. That motion passed unanimously. And then there was a motion to accept the remainder of the waterfowl rules as presented, and that motion passed unanimously. There was an electronic meeting rule amendment to approve as presented by the division. That motion passed unanimously. There was a presentation on the conservation permit list, and that motion was to approve as presented, and that passed unanimously. There was a motion to fill CWMU advisory committee vacancies. The motion was to approve the committee as presented, and that motion passed unanimously. They discussed the Parker Mountain Sage Grouse hunt closure. There was a motion to approve the hunt closure as presented. That also passed unanimously. Then there was a motion to elect Kevin Albrecht as the Wildlife Board Chair, and that motion passed unanimously. There was a motion to elect Randy Dirth as the Vice Chair, and that motion passed unanimously. Any questions about the board meeting? Vice Chair was Randy Dirth.
Did they fill, is there a vacant position on the board or two that are coming?
So they have been filled. So Gary Nilsson right back here. Gary, if you raise your hand, he was one of the people that was elected to the board, and the other one was Bryce Thurgood, I believe. Is that correct? Somebody from Salt Lake? Yeah, Gary said it is. Bryce Thurgood is the other one. Okay, anything else before we move into the action items of our agenda? Okay, the first item on the agenda is number 5, and that is the fur bear and bobcat harvest recommendations. I would call Darren DeBoy has joined us. I appreciate you getting here, Darren.
Yeah, sorry, I got stuck in the maze on the way in.
I know a person. I know a person that uses that excuse every time he's
Yeah,
late to anything.
well, I won't make that mistake twice. I was a little stressed.
No problem. So the next item is questions from the RAC for Darren.
Done a good job. That's what
Okay, go ahead, Ben.
I choose to believe.
Darren, I was looking through comments earlier, and one of the comments struck me a little bit as the comment was something to the effect of population levels, and my understanding is with this recommendation, with the increase in the week and the of the hunting season and the increase in the permit levels, the populations are doing well. Is that
All the
correct?
indications are, and there are a lot of juveniles in the harvest last year, and since trapping tends to be somewhat random in what you see in your traps, that would indicate an increase. So things are looking good. It seems like with bobcats in particular, probably the biggest driver in what we see harvest-wise though is pelt price, and it's lag. So pelt prices go up, you tend to see more people harvesting. That's probably more that than anything. And COVID is in the mix as well. So.
Thanks, Ben. Anybody else? Seeing none, questions from the public? Wow. Fantastic.
I couldn't hear most of what he was saying. Can we have him just make sure the mic is on and make sure he's talking into it?
What was that again, Chase?
I couldn't hear a lot of what he was saying. Either his mic wasn't on or he wasn't talking close enough to it. Just making sure he talks into his microphone.
I have a height issue, and so I can't get close. Is that better?
Can you hear it better there, Chase?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I'll try and do that.
Thank you. He basically said all indicators suggest that the bobcat population is doing well. Okay, I will turn the time over to Jason to summarize the public comments that we received from online.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. For the 2021-22 fur bearer recommendations, we received 2 online comments. One comment strongly disagreed and one comment somewhat agreed. So it was split 50-50 between the 2.
Thank you. Now, are there comments on this item from the public? We don't have any comments from the public on the bobcat recommendations. Okay, I'll turn the time over to the RAC for discussion. Do you have a comment? Yeah, for the Cougar. Hand that up, Sundays. Thank you. Discussion from the RAC. I'd entertain a motion then, I guess. This is going to go quick.
I'll make a motion that we accept as presented.
So I will say, before we do that, Mel, no, we have a motion on the table. We'll wait for a second. Go ahead. Okay, Scott seconded it. Now I'll open up the motion for discussion. I will say that I did receive an email from somebody asking that we not extend the season for a week, and that we not increase the tags. I'm not sure the reasoning behind that comment, but I wanted to throw that out there and make sure everybody was recognized for their comments.
Was that what I said?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I saw that, and that comment's appreciated. I'd like how Darren's presentation was with the online feature, and I think he did well and explained the rationale behind it. So I'd support it.
I agree. Okay, any other discussion? I'll call for a vote then. All in favor of the motion is that we approve the division's recommendations as presented for the bobcat recommendations. All those in favor? Any opposed? AJ, I can't see you, so I'm going to have to get a verbal vote from you, buddy.
Yes.
So passes unanimously. The next item on the agenda is the Cougar recommendations and Rule R657-10 revisions for the 21-22 season. Questions from the RAC for Darren? Let's go with Scott first, then Ben.
Darren, it wasn't clear to me on these spot and stock tags, are they good in any unit or are there specific units that I just missed that?
No, they're good on any
Sure.
open unit, and so that'd be pretty much any unit in the state that'd be available. If we needed to close a unit for some reason, they wouldn't be valid there, but right now they're all open.
And it seemed like that was, the intent with that was to comply with this new legislation. And did that preclude extending the season beyond December 31st?
No.
Is that the reason,
No,
or is there
the
other
language in the
justification?
legislation directs the division director to allow an opportunity in the fall for big game hunters to take a mountain lion spot with the spot and stock method.
Mhm.
So theoretically, you know, there are big game hunts that go further into the winter, but we felt like that time frame captured the spirit of what the legislation requires. So that's why we set those dates. But I guess theoretically it could go long into January if need be.
Yeah, it just seems that in part, our better snow, particularly for chasing lions, is later into the year than that. I understand the intent is if you have a tag in your pocket and you're chasing deer and elk, then you have an opportunity. There are a few crazy guys who like to slap on
It'd be most-
cross-country skis and chase
Yeah,
tracks
that's
as
true.
well. And that kind of precludes much of their better season, I guess, by stopping at December 31st.
Sure.
Would the division be opposed to extending that?
I don't have any concerns. I leave that up to the public process. It's, you know, I don't know if we presented data. It's a very low success hunt. I think we issued just over 1,000 spot and stock permits last year, and only 7 people harvested a lion. So it's hard to do.
Sure. Remind me of the season dates on the other 2 hunt types. When do they end?
They run through the winter. So our proposal this year, you know, if we go to this new timing, they'd end in June next year. So they'd open November, run through June. We'll come back in December, present recommendations for next year. And then that cycle would begin that July. So we go July to July moving forward.
So if I were to make a recommendation to match the spot and stock season dates with the other ones, what season dates would I?
It'd be, you'd want spot and stock to start earlier. You'd still want it to start August 1st because the dog hunt doesn't start until November. And then you could run it through July or June 30th.
Okay.
That would probably be what you're after.
Okay, Ben.
Yep. Brock, if my timing's wrong, let me know. We've got a request from the Houndsman Association regarding a rule change around a study that they're doing with BYU and DWR. And I see Wes here, so I'm wondering if it would be beneficial to just hear a little bit about that study prior to that discussion.
I have no objections to that.
Do you want to answer that? Or you want to have Wes answer it?
Wes, are you comfortable telling what your study's going to be about? Okay.
I'm fine with that. Come on up, Wes.
Wes Alexander. I'm the district biologist over the Manti and the Nebo. Just beginning my master's study through BYU. The study's going to be focused on mountain lions, calling that cats along the Nebo and the Wasatch. The focus of it is going to be on scavenging, trying to understand that aspect of cats. First, we're going to put dead deer, random placement throughout the mountain, camera traps, try to understand their using of the landscape in that regard. We're fairly early in the study. That's the scope of it is probably going to broaden as I'm starting classes in the end of next month. So it's fairly early, but that is going to be the beginning focus on it.
So, Wes, I'm sure you're aware that the ask from the Houndsman Association is that we don't allow take of a collared lion on those units for the next 3 years during that study. I'd like to hear your take on that.
Sure. From a study standpoint, certainly we put a collar on an animal. There's a lot there of it'd be nice to see it stay. However, with that, I don't know that the study is 100% hinges on zero harvest. I think we can be successful working with the houndsmen, have great guys that have been able to, we've got 6 collars out so far. From a division standpoint, we've remained neutral on that. I don't think the study's success hinges on, certainly we'd hope that they don't get wiped out. I mean, that could do it. The areas that they're in are tougher access. I'm hopeful that there's not a high harvest.
Thank you, Wes. Do you have a question for Wes or for Darren, Danny?
How many callers we thought? That's good. Your mic, please.
How many callers are we talking?
So like I say, we've got 6 out right now. Probably get up to 30 or so out at some point in time is the hope.
Yeah, obviously my point is you lose one and that's a big proportion of that data, so.
Sure. And I mean, with that, we would do our best to get those collars put back out. So again, the standpoint is neutral. From a study standpoint, certainly the longer we can keep them on, that is beneficial.
Thank you, Wes. Do you have a question for Wes or Darren?
We'll start with Wes. So my understanding of those 30 callers, maybe 5 are going to be on toms. The rest would be on females.
Somewhere around that percentage, yes.
And so obviously the Houndsman Association has paid for them now, but my understanding is that Division of Wildlife Resources will be paying for some of them later.
That is correct.
So that's, public monies. So right now I'm leaning to say, the data would be great because objective data for cougars might calm down some of the emotional data for cougars, right? And to have, again, the houndsman will be able to see a collar, so they won't. And my understanding is only for the hounds, only for hunters over dogs would this be an issue, correct?
Yes, the way the proposal reads, I believe, is for spot and stalk and depredation, they would still allow for harvest.
And if one of the cats moves to a different area, it can be shot, right? My understanding is that.
That is my understanding of the proposal as well.
So I can't figure out why we wouldn't want the data for 3 years. I think it'd be extremely valuable. And I don't see any downside to the sportsman when there's only 5 toms out there with this number of cats that we have in the state of Utah, why it would be a negative to honor your request,
So,
the houndsman's request.
So Jim, well, let's wait for discussion and comment for questions right now, please. But that's great. Okay, Darren, back up. Other questions for Darren from the RAC?
One thing to that study I'd like to add is those 6 cats were caught on dry ground this spring. It's an amazing accomplishment. So kudos to those houndsmen.
So the partners are great.
A couple of them were here. So they did caught a couple of moose too, but they, can't be perfect. But sorry about that. Go ahead.
Other questions? Go ahead, Josh.
Unless there's another question about the study or the collaring, I was going to ask a different.
Go ahead.
Houndsman also brought up a couple units where they felt depredation wasn't a limiting factor.
Mm-hmm.
It was habitat related. And so can you speak to the division's recommendations?
Yeah, and I'm sure they'll have an opportunity to kind of go through their proposal. And I don't know, Mr. Chairman, if you want to wait for that or not, but I'm happy to address it now if you want.
Well,
does everybody know what we're talking about? I don't know if the audience necessarily knows.
So they probably don't know what you're talking about until after, and I think we'll have an opportunity to ask Darren after the UHA makes a
I'll
presentation.
definitely answer the question, but maybe we can have them do their comment and then we can go from there.
I think that's a great idea. Thank you. Other questions for Darren?
I have one, Brock.
Go ahead, Mike.
So in past tracks, the concern's been brought up, but that on some of the private lands units that are mostly private lands, that most of those opportunities are limited harvest and harvest objective. What kind of success rates are you having on your private lands, Cougar units?
It varies from unit to unit. I think the pattern that we see most on private land units are a concentration of harvests. And so people tend to go where they have access. And so East Canyon is a good example, but it's one that we actually made a recommendation somewhat counter. Sorry about going back and forth to the mic here. Because people are just limited on where they can go. That occurs on all units to a certain extent because most of the hunting takes place in the winter. And so if those roads are closed or the snow levels are high enough. So we're trying to get a grip on that. We did ask for exact locations of kills last year, and we've been able to start looking at some of that data, and we are seeing some of that pattern. Did that answer your question?
I mean, that helps. It would be nice to know kind of, if we're hitting those target numbers or if we're, way off of them.
If we look at, so I did an analysis to look at what harvests look like this year compared to last year, where we have a lot of units in predator management plans. And there are a few units where we saw, so if you compare it to the quotas that were in place last year, and then those units just opening up for unlimited harvest, most units were right about where their quotas were set last year. For some units, that was an increase. For others, it was about par for the course. And others still, they take far fewer line, even with an unlimited harvest strategy. So it kind of depends on the units.
Okay.
And I can certainly get into unit by unit info if that helps. But just as a general feel, it looks like predator management, at least so far, has increased opportunity, but not necessarily a huge increase in unit by unit harvest. But overall, we did see an increase.
And then on your private lands, mostly private lands units, and most of those occur in the north, obviously. Right, where are you getting your depredating problems from cougars?
The region certainly could speak to this too, but the hot spots last year were on the far north, like the Cache unit. We had quite a bit of, although it seems to be going down, the incidences are dropping year after year. And the other was on the Monroe, I believe, where we had requests. Wildlife Services is here. I don't want to put them on the hot seat, but if there's some other areas that you had hot cougar, those two would be the big ones.
Do you have a lot of those? I mean, are a lot of those cases on private lands or more on public lands?
The ones I'm thinking of are mostly public land allotments.
Okay.
But Chalk Creek and there's a little bit of an overlap between CWMU operators and domestic livestock producers where they're doing both activities on the same property. So they've kind of got dual concerns. But
and then the spot and stock tags, they don't really pertain to units that are under limited entry or harvest objective.
Yeah, they're good on any unit. So
they good on any
They have been
unit?
available for, during the fall, and people can just go wherever. So yeah, if a unit's a limited entry beginning in November, they can hunt spot and stock in the fall.
So if a private land owner has a problem, he could obtain one of those permits,
Right,
and at least feel like he could address that problem.
Right, and if we can go to the new schedule, they'd be able to purchase a harvest objective permit beginning in July. So if they had issues while they were on the mountain, they could use that avenue. And we also will issue tags. Wildlife Services does the lion's share, no pun intended. I just realized I said, but they do a lot of the work with our producers to handle specific incidences. And so between those different tools, we try to address problems.
Okay, I'll save my comment for later.
Other questions for Darren?
Yeah, I have another one. So it didn't take long for HB 125 to go into effect, obviously. Can you maybe just explain to the folks who aren't as familiar with the legislation or what it's going to take for those units to fall back out once you determine that the population levels are under control?
So just to summarize what the House bill, it's now trying to remember it's code now, so it's the law.
Right.
It's like 23, 16, and 10, I think. So for those of you who are curious, if you want to look it up, it basically requires the division director to take immediate action if the division determines that a ungulate population is below population objective for a unit. And we're talking mostly about mule deer, but it does say ungulates, so we'd be looking at other things too. It does stipulate that the division should determine whether or not cougars are significant, or any predator, it covers any bears and other predators as well, is significantly contributing to the ungulate population not reaching its objectives. That's kind of the bill in a nutshell. And then there's some other things about we'll issue permits, we'll allow big game hunters to take. It has some things about wildlife services and some other folks that we could engage. So we were left with, well, how do we determine if mountain lions or bears or any of these other predators contributing? Fortunately, we have thousands of collars on big game animals throughout the state. And for a lot of units, we have cause-specific mortality, and we can see what percentage of adult does, for example, are dying because of lion predation as compared to habitat loss or other factors. So we did establish a policy to give our biologists some sideboards on how to make decisions about whether predator management ought to be implemented or not. That policy, I believe, went out around last year, and it was approved by the board. There's really two instances that we'd be looking at. One is cause specific, where we can see that high mortality of the lions is likely to be causing either a dampening in the recovery of a population or causing a decline. The other instance is predation can be a factor in population growth if the population is very far below the carrying capacity of the habitat where those animals live. So, there's only so many mouths that can be fed in a given square acre, for example. But if habitat isn't limiting, but you're failing to see those animals recover, a lot of times that can be caused by a downward pressure from predation on the top end. As you approach the carrying capacity, that predator control tends to not be as effective because they'll die from some other cause, disease, malnutrition, those kinds of things. I think the concern that the houndsmen have, and again, we'll let them make their comment, is that in some cases, it seems like we're issuing predator management plans on units where we've seen drought loss, for example, and that is the case. When those populations of deer decline sharply, the literature would suggest that cougar populations stay high for some period of time and eventually will decline. But that lag period can be as long as 8 years, and that can affect the recovery of the mule deer population. And so our objective in those cases would be to reduce the density of cougars in the short term and then let those populations get more in balance going forward. So there are some units that fall into those cases. The only other thing I'd add is when we wrote the policy, we consciously put a lot of latitude in the hands of our district biologists. We wanted to push that decision down to as far to ground level as possible. And so we really rely on our district folks to make a call about whether or not predator management is needed on their individual units. And they're the ones, so it's bottom up as far as those plans go. So hopefully that clarified things.
Yeah, mostly just, I guess the question I really have is, of the 33 designated units that have been identified, is it this 3-year average that we're talking about until
Yeah,
they're
so you were asking about, well, how do we know if it made a difference?
Correct. Yeah. How often is it going to be revisited?
Our indication, when we did a study on Monroe, I don't know how long ago now, 15 years ago, Stoner and Wolf did a study where they actually tried the objective of the study was to lower cougar densities on the Monroe. It took about 3 years of sustained high quotas to get to that point. Once they got to that point and released that population and backed off, within about 3 years, they were back where they started. So we'll be looking at things like, cause-specific mortality where we have that data, fawn recruitment. There'll be several factors, but we're looking at about a 3-year predator management run, and then we'll reevaluate those units. And if it doesn't look like it worked, that'd be another reason why we might pull them out. It just doesn't seem like, this isn't a perfect science, and there may be some units where we thought cougars might be contributing, and that may not be the case. And so in those cases, we pull them out too. So this season will be the second year of last year's predator management plan. So we'll be reevaluating next year a lot of those plans.
Darren, how many of the 33 units are you monitoring deer on? Do you know?
I don't know off the top of my head. Sorry. But it's better than I would, Brock, as far as where we've got collars. And we were monitoring deer.
Just trying to throw you a bone here, buddy.
Yeah. Okay, here we go. When you said monitoring, I was thinking collars. And we monitor deer on every unit in the state.
But are you collaring so cause specific?
Right, yeah. So there's a handful. We don't have cause specific on every unit. But we have enough spread across the state that I think that our biologists have a pretty good handle.
It's like the
on whether that's an issue or
mid-20s,
not.
so
Yeah.
75% of the units.
Well, and predator management for deer is only on 16 of those units, and the rest are bighorn sheep. So it's not an all-out war on cougars because of deer. I just want to point that out.
And bighorn sheep is another issue. Those, you can get one animal in a bighorn sheep herd, and that can actually, just because of the numbers game, that can be devastating over the short term. So, but in the policy, there's criteria for sheep units as well.
Other questions from the RAC? Go ahead, Danny.
Yeah, hey, so, predator prey, right?
Did it again. Ooh, it's green. So the question is what would be your druthers as the manager? Male, female, older, younger? I think that covers the plane that we're.
If the goal is what, to reduce
Yeah,
densities?
right. It's predator
You
management.
need to take females, the reproducing.
Older
portion of
or
the
younger, you think?
Probably older. They tend to be more fecund, but we're really looking at percentages. So for a predator management unit, our objective would be to have more than 40% females in the harvest. That should indicate a decline.
Right. And for a houndsman, that's doable. I mean, there's 10 yards away maybe or something. So yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Other questions from the RAC? Questions from the public? Do you have a question? Go ahead, Corey. State your name when you come up, and if you represent yourself or somebody else or a group, and then ask the question.
Corey Huntsman. I'm with the Utah Houndsman Association. Darren, I have a question for you on the parameters for the predator management to exit a plan. Would there be any triggers for lines if it showed alarming numbers? For instance, like 2 lions killed on the manti that goes from 30 to just a unit to throw, just a name to throw out on a unit. But would there be any emergency exits for a cougar predator management?
There aren't any defined, so we wouldn't say after a certain drop or those kind of things. But the policy relies on our district biologists, and so we're relying on them to notice those kinds of triggers, and then if they need to, pull them out. So what I would say, and this holds true for any kind of management decision, get to know your local biologists, work closely with them, especially if you're seeing things on the mountain that concern you, and they really are in the driver's seat on these plans. And so let them know if you've got concerns, and that's probably, I think, the best approach. I like to have enough flexibility in the policy to allow people unit by unit to make decisions about what's going on, and they're the people on the ground. So that's all I say about it.
Okay, one last
Yeah,
question.
go ahead.
While you're up here. I should have just called Wardle on this. I mentioned I haven't, but the Pavant, it's been in sheep predator management for 2 years now, and we don't have sheep on that unit, and I haven't heard of anything being approved to put sheep on that unit.
I talked to Mike today. So yeah, one of the sheep criteria for predator management is if a transplant is imminent. So the idea there is to get in and remove some of those predators before the sheep hit the mountain. It sounds like the Pavants hit a little bit of a snag on bringing sheep in, and so they're going to be evaluating that. It kind of depends on what's going on with some of the allotments on there. They'd plan on converting some of those sheep allotments to cattle, and that's taking longer than I guess what they initially thought. So Pavant, you're right, doesn't have sheep on it currently. The reason it has a predator management plan is anticipation of those sheep, but it is dragging out. So Mike said he's going to take a look at that. And again, our plan is to come back in December and talk about this again. So he's got about 6 months to take a look.
Thank you, Corey. Other questions from the public? Okay, I'll turn the time over to Jason to summarize the online comments that we received.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. So for the 2021-22 Cougar Recommendations, we received 7 comments online, and I do know that there were other emails that were sent to the RAC members, and I sent one this afternoon as well, and I think you're able to look at that. As far as the breakdown on the recommendations or the comments on the recommendations, we had about 43% of the recommendations strongly disagree, 28.5% strongly agree, and another 28.5% somewhat agree. If you kind of look at any trends that were with those comments, for the strongly agree comments, there were 2 comments. They focused on, they like the proactive approach, and one comment said they'd like to do the same thing with bears. For the somewhat agree, there were 2 comments, and agreeing with recommendations, and they'd actually like to extend that to trapping to capture cougars, mountain lions. And then on the strongly disagree, there were 3 comments, and the thoughts were they're overselling cougar tags and that the decisions were politically driven rather than scientifically driven.
Thank you, Jason. I think it is noteworthy that there were only 7 comments total. So now we will have a public comment, and when we call your name, please step up to the microphone, state your name, state whether you represent yourself or you're representing an organization, and then you'll have 3 minutes to provide your comment, and we'll keep track of your time up here. So the first person will be Logan Christian.
And if I'm not mistaken, three minutes to.
That's correct,
okay.
yes.
I'm just gonna time myself real quick so I don't go over. All right, so my name's Logan Christian. I'm representing Mountain Lion Foundation. So thanks for the opportunity to comment on the Cougar Hunt recommendations. First, I'd like to offer 3 recommendations, some of which are based on some correspondence our organizations had with the Utah Houndsman Association. So we're in most part supporting their recommendations. So correct me if I'm wrong on any of this. So first of all, not adding the Beaver East unit to predator management status. And we would also recommend from our organization not adding any more units to predator management status until the DWR establishes clear criteria for when a unit enters predator management status. The public should also be given opportunities to provide feedback on those criteria as they are established. Second, changing existing predator management units to harvest objective units or split units with sustainable quotas rather than unlimited quotas, and establishing these sustainable quotas with objective research. And third, that hunters are not permitted to kill collared lions as per the discussion about interfering with that study. So these recommendations are in line with the best available science on mountain lion management. Mounting evidence suggests a management approach of controlling cougar populations to reduce predation is less effective than one might expect. Research published by Dr. Hilary Cooley and others in 2009 found that heavy cougar harvest corresponds with increased immigration that more than compensates for cougar removal. More recently, a study published in 2020 by Drs. John Laundrie and Christopher Papochis found that deer populations in a state where cougars are not hunted show no significant differences in density and abundance compared to deer populations in states that allow cougar hunting when controlling for other factors. Instead of targeting mountain lions and other predators to boost big game species, we instead need to address climate issues such as droughts and wildfire, as well as habitat loss due to urban expansion. We ask that the DWR reevaluate mule deer and bighorn sheep population objectives and set more realistic targets for the species that incorporate current habitat availability and climate factors. We would further ask that the DWR factor in the impacts of domestic livestock and disease transmission to wild populations instead of immediately resorting to killing more mountain lions. Finally, we ask the DWR to consider the myriad ecosystem services that mountain lions provide when establishing hunt recommendations. These cats keep big game populations healthy while also promoting biodiversity, which can benefit hunters. Recent studies show that mountain lion produce carrion supports dozens of species of birds and mammals and hundreds of species of insects and beetles. Mountain lions also predate on deer with chronic wasting disease, which improves the health of deer herds for the benefit of hunters. Moreover, one recent study found that cougars actually help keep roadways safe by changing deer behavior and reducing deer vehicle collisions. So these cats have much to offer for both Utah's hunting and non-hunting communities, and the hunt recommendation should reflect that reality. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Christian. Sunday's hunt.
Before I get to my comments, I just want to do a quick shout out to what a fine group of gentlemen you guys are. I brought my disabled brother on a date tonight, and from the moment he was unloaded from the van, this gentleman here was greeting him, big smile without me even being there, and just so impressive because he's so easy to overlook and just pass right by. And I just want to say, we walked in here and you guys had already settled into that row and jumping up and making waves. So just, wow, really impressive. So, good evening. My name is Sundays Hunt. I'm the Utah State Director for the Humane Society United States and a resident of Utah. On behalf of my organization and our supporters in Utah, I ask this RAC to oppose recommended changes to the 2021 bobcat and cougar hunting seasons, including opposing the increase in bobcat hunting permits and the use of predator management plans for cougars. The DWR seeks to expand the use of predator management plans for cougars, allowing unlimited year-round hunting in 33 units. This means that cougars will be subject to unlimited hunting in the majority of our state. These plans are harmful to Utah's cougar populations, disrupting their sensitive social structures and killing female cougars, who may be raising dependent young. It's also harmful to Utah's ranchers, as killing territorial cougars opens up their range to young cats who are more likely to go after easy prey like livestock, as well as wander into human communities. The use of predator management plans is not grounded in sound wildlife management science and will not support healthy, sustainable mule deer and bighorn sheep herds in the long run. Decades of research shows that indiscriminate hunting of cougars will not enhance big game populations. Mule deer and bighorn sheep across the West have experienced population declines over the latter part of the last century because of a myriad of factors such as habitat loss, changes in forage quality, disease, heavy hunting, and drought. DWR must address these factors if it wants to boost herd numbers. The scientific consensus for the last several decades has generally concluded that native carnivores can modulate ungulate populations and keep them healthier. This is because native carnivores remove the sick and weak animals that would die of other causes anyway, including chronic wasting disease or CWD. Yet DWR has already implemented predator management plans in areas where CWD has infiltrated herds. Cougars are especially useful in removing CWD-infected individuals from a herd early on in their infection, helping reduce the spread of disease. Bobcats and other scavenge on CWD-infected carcasses, further reducing the spread of the disease through soil and air. Furthermore, DWR's population goals for big game species like deer are likely no longer be obtainable given the factors I mentioned, especially increased human development into our wild spaces. Meanwhile, hunters are killing more cougars now than ever before as DWR seeks to meet these unrealistic goals. Rather than scapegoating cougars and bobcats, we should be reevaluating deer and sheep herd goals and setting realistic population targets that prioritize wildlife and environmental health. DWR's recommendations and predator management plans allow for heavy, unsustainable killing of bobcats and cougars, largely against any substantial evidence or best available science that doing so is beneficial for wildlife or Utahns. No other state allows such widespread heavy hunting or cougars to boost prey populations, largely because the science just doesn't support this approach when we know other factors like development and weather have a much greater influence on big game populations. We cannot keep killing our way to better wildlife management. Rather, we need substantial, effective management that looks at entire ecosystems, including the significant benefits cougars and bobcats can provide. We ask you to reject DWR's recommendations and oppose their predator management plans. It is time for DWR to update the agency's management strategies by relying on the latest science to better conserve native carnivores and prey species alike. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Sundays.
It gives some sightings.
Next comment, Corey Huntsman.
Corey Huntsman, I am with the Utah Houndsman Association. I'm just going to cover the lion collar to save time. Matt Farnsworth will cover the UHA proposal. As we mentioned about the collar study, we are proposing to prohibit killing collared lions. Forgive me, I got to fumble through my notes since we've gone through this already. I'll try not to be too redundant. We'd like to propose it just to prohibit killing lions with the aid of hounds within the boundaries of the study only. This would not include depredation or spot and stalk and will continue to allow the take of collared lions for both scenarios. The exact time frame for the study is yet to be determined, but will likely exist for around 7 years. The current cougar management plan that we're in right now started in 2015 and it ends 2025. I would suggest that we implement this law for a 3-year duration to ensure the necessary data is gained to assist in a revamped cougar management plan. From there, we can reevaluate the cause and effects to determine if there's a need to prolong or terminate the proposal for the remainder of the study. A couple key notes to point out: none of the proposed 6 units are in predator management for deer. In fact, the deer in these units that encompass a study area are doing reasonably well and better than most of the rest of the state. They didn't have the winter die-offs like the Cache or Chalk Creek did. There are 3 units that are currently in bighorn predator management. However, having GPS capabilities on the lions would actually significantly benefit the sheep for depredation issues. Last note, we're only collaring a small handful of cats on each unit. We're also concentrating on extremely rugged and roadless terrain where lion hunters typically do not hunt. I don't believe this will take away any opportunities from sportsmen, but would protect the lions if they were to travel through more hunter-friendly terrain. If a collar lion were to leave the designated area, it would then be legal for hunters to harvest for all legal hunting methods, including the aid of hounds. Any questions from the RAC?
No, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, Corey. Next comment, Brian Hoover.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Brian Hoover, and I guess to start out, I want to say thank you for the shout out. I do think it's amazing, and I think we have an amazing group here tonight. And the biggest part about that amazing is the only reason every one of us is here is for the same reason. The same reason to preserve our wildlife in this state and to watch out for what we have out there. We all have our own ideas and thoughts about it, but we're all here for the same reason, and we've got to band together on that. and make sure that we're taking that forward as that. So I just wanted to state, Mr. Chairman, that I am in support of Corey's proposal. A couple items, the 6 units that are in the study area would be the Nebo West Face Strawberry, Cascade, Wasatch, and then the Oakers west side, east. So with that stated, the 2015 to 2025 Cougar Management Plan actually called out for a need for additional study opportunities and objectives. And I've written a letter to the board here that actually highlights those recommendations coming from the 2015 to 2025. Some of those are enhanced population techniques, predator-prey crossover abilities if they go to different prey opportunities. As Wes stated, we don't really have a full gamut of what the study is. We're just establishing the parameters as he's getting back into school. However, we have had discussions around population techniques, increased understanding of habitat use and prey dependency, increased understanding of cougar disbursement throughout Utah, which keeping these cats collared is actually going to help us with that disbursement model. Increased understanding and validation of lion scavenging, such as what Wes suggested. Anyway, Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to support the recommendation and give the facts of that it's actually called out in the Cougar Management Plan of today to forward our study capabilities and need of knowledge and data around these animals. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Matt Farnsworth.
My foot fell asleep listening to them guys talk, so hopefully I don't fall over. Matt Farnsworth, I'm representing the Utah Houndsman Association tonight. Want to start by saying thanks to Darren. In the past, we haven't had necessarily the greatest working relationship with the division. I appreciate everything he's done to kind of help build that bridge. It's amazing to me that we're 7 o'clock and we're almost done with the lion proposal. That speaks to Darren there. As far as the UHA, we'd asked to remove the public lands verbiage from Rule 65710-21. That's the depredation rule. I sent you guys an email on that. So if a livestock owner has a lion that comes in and kills his livestock, he has 96 hours to remove that lion. He can also, if he can't get it done in the 96 hours, contact Wildlife Services and they can assist him with that. There is a section in there that Section 4A allows for the division in areas of chronic depredation to issue depredation tags to a landowner. And if it's private lands, we don't have any issues with that. The problem we have with 4A is the public lands grazing allotment section there. And this kind of came to a head over the winter. Individual had sheep on a summer range with chronic depredation. Sheep had been off the mountain for a period of time. He had those depredation tags and they harvested a pile of lions through the winter when the sheep hadn't been on the mountains for months. We don't have a problem with the landowners or livestock owners harvesting the cats on their property or that are actively hunting their animals, but month-long period after the sheep have been removed from public lands, we'd like you guys to take a second to look at that. As far as the not adding Beaver East to the predator management plan, I'll use the manti as example. The data on the manti shows that there could be some predator issues holding that population back. We might not like it, but the Houndsman Association realizes that's what the data shows, and we can agree with that. On the Beaver East, all the data that we have compiled shows the deer moving into winter with relatively poor body condition, which may lead to more or point toward more of a habitat issue than a depredation issue. And we ask that they not add that for that reason. House Bill 125, the law now, is very clear about when populations go into predator management or when House Bill 125 applies. And we talked a little bit about the drought today. That's not part of the equation. We would ask that the division could reevaluate their policy, I believe is the way he worded it, put it through a public process, come up with clear criteria when a unit comes into it, when a unit goes out of predator management, so everybody's on the same page. We all have the data. We can all look at it and check each other's facts. And lastly, just an idea, predator management works really well, or is touted as working very well in a targeted removal effort. Currently, the whole state is open just about year round for the harvest of lions. We believe if you would take some of those harvest objective units that aren't in predator management, move them to a limited entry, or in this case, split entry or split units, or the direction the division's been going, that would force the hunters to the areas that the targeted removal is required. Those 33 units that are in predator management that the division wants to harvest. It would allow a couple benefits. I know in the presentation he mentioned quite a bit about the simplifying the proclamation. It'd get rid of one hunt strategy completely, take it down to predator management, open year round over the counter, or the limited entry that splits to harvest objective later on in the year if tags are still available, if harvest hasn't been met. It would accomplish the division's goals on both of those items. Are there any questions I can answer for anybody, particularly regarding the letter?
Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Chase Brereton. Chase must not be here. Do I read this or? He said he supports season dates and tag numbers, but proposed a few changes to licenses and units closed to beaver trapping. But I don't know what he means by that. Maybe Darren does since he jumped up.
Yeah, I can explain. There are areas in the state where they've been closed to beaver trapping. We evaluate those annually to take a look. I think that's from the Trappers Association. They had some ideas about maybe allowing some limited harvest in some of those areas. I think that's the gist of what they were driving at. So a draw system for beaver trapping is I think what they were talking about.
Okay, I'll turn the time over to the RAC for discussion. Actually, I'll start this by commenting. A couple of the commenters said they would encourage the state to look at the management objectives for all the deer units and come up with more realistic management goals for each of those units. And I would comment that the state just did that last year. They mandated that everybody look at the population objective for ungulates on each unit and come up with a more realistic based on habitat quality, condition of those animals, and so forth. And those came through the RAC last fall, all those new population objective numbers, and those were all approved. And secondly, well, that's probably it. I will say, somebody said it'd be nice to see if this was working, and BYU just summarized the data today and sent out an email, and the South Manti, which went into PMP, so far this year has 97% adult deer survival. Last year, we lost 20% of that herd to lions alone because we are monitoring cause specific on that unit. So just there's a piece of data that suggests that at least in that unit, it appears to be working.
I have a question before we start to discuss, so I can get on and understand a little bit more about the study. I tend to be supportive of not harvesting the colored lions, but there are some comments made that it sounds like the study doesn't know what it's going to study yet. And so is it going to study mortality at all? Is that part of the goal of the study?
Wes, you're welcome to come back up if you want, but the discussions that I've been privy to, right now we're focusing on the question of scavenging. You may be aware USU is conducting a study right now and looking at what lions are killing and eating out there, looking at their diet, among other things, and a population, trying to develop a population model as well. And we had some questions about right now, and BYU's study on deer, they're going into kill sites, both studies are, and trying to determine, obviously if a lion was there and it clustered up and they go in and find a dead animal, then it's likely it was killed by the lion. But sometimes they find an animal that doesn't appear to have bite marks, and so there's a little bit of fuzzy. And then when BYU goes in, they're trying to determine there's lion sign. Is it they're scavenging or did it kill it? That kind of. So we want to try to put a finer point on that question, and so that's the main focus. There may be some other benefits.
Like lion mortality, not
right now we're
lions killing, but what's killing lions?
Right now,
the mortality.
that's not the focus.
Okay.
There's some pretty good data in the state about what mortality on lions is from stoner and wolf. So, but there are some other options in the study, and that might be hammered out later. Good enough.
Ken.
Yes, this winter, I had a opportunity for 4 days to go out with the division and collar deer. And I seen firsthand the expense it is to collar deer in the winter, and yet that's the easiest time there is to catch them. I cannot
Technical check. Technical to check. Springville, do you copy?
Paul, this is Justin. I think the other participants on the call are still with us, but I don't see Springville.
I'm in text with on-site support now.
Luke and Chase, is that the case?
Appears to be, yes.
I believe so. Thank you.
Springville, do you copy? We are still waiting for on-site confirmation from the Springville office. We'll remain in technical issues. Please stand by. Springville, do you copy?
We copy you. Do you copy us?
Yes, you're back on. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay. We'll give Mike another minute and then we'll resume the meeting. We didn't know it was going to happen that fast. These IT guys are amazing. Darren, do you have something to comment on?
A couple of things that would help with the discussion. Pertaining to and I haven't talked to the houndsman yet, so I don't want to blindside him, but just so everybody knows, the language about public land depredation hunting is code. So that's not something that the board can change. That's something that the legislature would have to change. Yeah, so one of the requests from the Houndsman Association was to not allow, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but to curtail hunting on public land on depredation permits. And the public land language is in code. So in order to change that, we would have to have the legislature act. So you can make recommendations to the board, but it's not something the board can change.
Before we move off that
Yes.
point, so my understanding is there was harvest past that 96-day window that kind of created this issue.
Right.
Is there another way to address that?
Yeah, so what the instruction we've given to our biologists is there's a couple of ways. In chronic depredation situations where a producer hits the mountain year after year and is getting hit by lions year after year after year, the division can issue permits after the domestic sheep have left the mountain for them to continue to work that situation. And once the sheep leave the mountain, typically Wildlife Services doesn't continue to help. That's just, I don't want to say policy, but typically that's how it happens. So it allows the landowner to continue that. On a lot of the units in the state, they can go ahead and purchase a harvest objective permit and do that. It typically isn't as productive until the snow flies, but that's an option. On some units, that's not an option if the unit closes, for example. What our biologists try to do is to limit either in space or time or both those permits to try to address a specific problem. So if, beyond 2 weeks, there's no guarantee that you've got the same lion still hitting a sheep herd, but in some instances you might. And so we're leaving that up to our district biologists to make that call and our regional managers. And so what they'll do in those instances is draw a boundary around where they could take and so we try to limit those permits in time and space. But producers do have other tools in some instances. Also, those have been used rarely, but occasionally up north we've issued some, and we issued some down south last year, but it's not an option that's used a lot in the state, but it is a tool that's available to us to try to address a problem. So I don't know if that helps at all.
Thank you. Ben?
Mr. Chairman, the majority of my thoughts are centered around the UHA recommendations. I'll start with the collar, the ask of to not allow take of collared lions, since we've kind of already started that discussion. When I first saw this ask, my initial gut reaction was I didn't like it, and that stems largely from a couple of things. One, there was a similar situation out on the Okers that lasted for about 12 years, and that bugs me to not allow hunters to take a certain lion for that length of time. And then there was a discussion a handful of years ago about bighorn sheep, and there was an ask to not allow take of bighorn sheep that were collared. And at the time, most of the hunting organizations, conservation organizations were opposed to that being, a once in a lifetime animal, and I tend to agree there. And that was ultimately, shot down. That did not go through. So that's a little background of where my gut reaction came from. Then I had a conversation with Brian, and he helped me realize that the ask was for 3 years. And after that conversation, I think that this ask is reasonable, at least for 3 years. At that point, if we reevaluate, I may change my mind. I don't know, but I think the ask for 3 years is probably reasonable. I'd be willing to support that. Now they've got several asks here, Mr. Chairman. What do you want to take these on a line by line basis and discuss them one at a time?
So actually, let's just end this one on the callers right now, and then I have a list of all the comments that I heard from the public as we went through, and let's just try to address one at a time. So let's stick with this caller issue, and then any other comments on the taking of collared lions?
Yeah, I like what Ben said. I also like my preference is in our motion that there be some kind of an expiration date on it. Yeah.
That is the ask from the association is for 3 years.
Yeah,
to expire with the expiration of the current management plan.
So we would want that in the motion because unless we're going to accept the entire recommendation. So if that's what you want to do, if that's what you choose to do. Any other discussion on that? I would entertain a motion on that issue then.
Just one more comment. I love these collar studies. Brock, you've been involved in a bunch. They're awesome. The data we're collecting from them has been just fantastic. And that helps me get there on this with that 3-year sunset. But with that, I'll go ahead and make the motion that we don't allow take on those units of a collared line, basically except their number 2. Is that sufficient?
I'll second that.
Okay, Ben's made the motion and Ken has seconded that we don't allow the take of harvest of collared lions in this 6-unit area of the proposed study until the plan is reviewed in 2025.
Also, that is pertaining to hounds take, correct?
Hound take, that's correct.
Doesn't
Hound
apply
take
to
only.
predation and spot and stock. And so maybe a point of clarification for you guys from UHA. The reason for not making that pertain to spot and stock, is that a visibility issue?
On the spot and stock, yes, visibility issue. We wouldn't want to hem up a hunter just made an honest mistake. As far as depredation, if collared lions causing depredation, it needs to be removed.
Okay, I think those are both fair points.
Before we call for a vote, I do have one question for Darren. Darren, is cost-specific mortality of lions part of the proposed study?
No.
That's exactly why I asked that before, just because I know it costs so much to collar our deer, and when the first one got shot, I think there was some hesitation by the biologist, like, oh, they're getting shot, but that's all part of the mortality of it, the study. So
in some
but
studies,
this
it provides great information.
Yeah.
So like in our elk study, we learned that we were losing like 4% of the herd to wounding loss. I mean, that's a huge number.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I had that thought, and Mike, that was a great question. So in this instance, if I understand right, then that's really a non-issue if we're not shooting those lions, right?
I'm not commenting.
Brock, you're one of the professionals on this matter. I value your opinion. I honestly do. On this.
You might not vote, but you can comment.
Any other? Go ahead, Danny.
Yeah, I can support this because this is science.
Any other comments or discussion? Okay, I call the motion. All in favor of the motion that we recommend not allowing harvest of collared lions for the next 3 years by using hounds. All in favor of that? Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Chase and AJ?
Aye for AJ.
Chase, I think you're on mute, buddy.
All right, I oppose.
Okay, so that's passes unanimously.
Chase.
Oh, he opposed. Okay, sorry. 2, 4. 11-1. Okay, let's discuss the go ahead. Hey, Chase, do you want to share your reason for opposition? Thank you, Ben.
Just for the most part, I accept a lot of it. I mean, I do like that it's keeping spot and stock and depredation. I guess I just want to be the one guy on the.
Okay. Okay. The next thing that I have on my list is not adding the Beaver East to predator management. We want to discuss that.
Let me just quickly remind the RAC, this is not an action item. The predator management plans are approved by the director's authority, but certainly we can have the discussion, but it's not something that's in the purview of the board or the RAC.
It's not, but we can make a recommendation to the board for
Certainly.
sure.
Yep, certainly.
for me, I don't know enough about it to say yes or no, you know? I mean, I understand that the houndsmen have asked that, but without hearing the other side of the coin, there's no way I could make a recommendation on that, especially from the, you know, professional biologist side of it.
And I tend to agree with that as well.
Yeah, I'm inclined just to side with the biologist's expertise on that. And if that's what they feel is best, assume that that's the case.
Ben?
Yeah, I think I'm kind of in that arena as well. And if it's not something we can take action on anyway, we might just be spinning our wheels discussing it.
Okay. There's several things that I don't think we can take action on, like oppose using PMP. That's established by the legislature and set by the director. What about the recommendation of removing, so we can't do anything about it because it's legislative, but removing the public lands verbiage from the code?
Yeah, again, we can't do anything about it, but that one, I've been wrestling with that one a little bit. I jotted some notes down, like if the purpose of this is, I can respect the houndsman opinion that, you know, on private land, do what you got to do, but on public land, maybe not. But then on the other hand, I also look at it as, if we've got a chronic depredation issue on public land, then we're paying loss fees to that grazer, which is public funds, right? So I'm a little torn on that one. But again, if we can't take action on it anyway, then maybe it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I mean, it seems like the biologist can deal with that. Maybe not in code. You know, we can't deal with the code, but the biologist can deal with
Right.
those depredation windows of harvest, and maybe they feel like there was, I mean, if a pile of cougars were killed, maybe there were a lot of cougars there and it was a real issue, and that was the biologist's opinion, and that's the plan they followed through with. I don't know how, again, I could micromanage that.
Any other items you guys are jumping out at you? Josh?
Yeah, this is a question for Darren. Several of the public comments here tonight were critical of the division's criteria by which a unit could be put into this to enact the legislation. I guess it's a twofold question. One, do you feel confident in the current division's criteria for unit entering into this cougar management sort of plan that oversteps the previous, you know, the management plan? And then two, the criteria for then it exiting.
Yeah. The policy requires two things. One is a clear explanation for why it would be going in. And it could be the reasons I mentioned, that it doesn't necessarily have to be cause specific. It could be habitat related, short-term habitat related. So a drought, for example, is a really good example. And that's one of the reasons why so many units are in right now, is because we've seen a really a large decline in mule deer herds, and we're trying to reduce cougar densities to try to accommodate what would happen naturally over time in a shorter period of time. The policy also requires criteria in each plan for when the plan will end, and so and I trust our district biologists to do both of those things.
So then, as part of that, there was an ask that no more units be added until we have more data on the ones that have just been entered in. Is that in the purview of all of us, or is that bound by the legislation?
Predator management falls under the director as per the code. So we evaluate units twice a year. We look at them in July following the winter and make determinations then. And we also look at them in December right after we catch a lot of deer and look at body conditions. So we can kind of forecast what the winter might do. And so we'll continue to do that. Our biologists are sensitive to what's going on in their units. And if they feel like it's necessary, they'll certainly recommend it.
Yeah. And then I guess this would be a discussion for everybody, and really my last point. Since this legislation changed the current management plan so significantly, is it worth calling back that Cougar Advisory Group to sort of address the question as opposed to waiting till 2025? Because when that management plan was set, it didn't anticipate this large of a, so I guess my comments in both question is, this law isn't representative of the advisory group, right? And so I wonder, how do we re-enter the conversation through the RAC in the Wildlife Board process? Because in wearing a different hat during the legislative session in 2020, I know that this law was enacted because of a growing sense of frustration that things weren't necessarily happening through the RAC process. And so how do we revisit it here, knowing that we're bound by the legislation?
It's a great question.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I served as a representative on the Cougar Advisory Committee, and you know, what was passed is above our pay grade. Essentially everybody in this room, you know, I don't see the director here. So, so I don't know how that's going to impact that plan that was put forth, or if, you know, getting them back together would do anything to help that, because that egg's still out of that basket now. So
I just
You want to
wonder-
comment on that, Darren?
I can. We did do an internal review this year. So we got, and one of the questions was, should we reconvene the committee? We felt like with the legislation, a lot of things there, a committee really couldn't change. And so we made changes to the plan to reflect those changes. We did feel like the underlying criteria in the plan were still sound. And so for units that don't fall into predator management as per legislation, we felt like we still had some good guidelines in the plan. There's a couple things that are coming down the road that I think would set us up for a good committee plan. You know, is this plan, or committee meetings as this plan sunsets? And that is, WAFWA is about to publish their Cougar guidelines updated, which would inform some of that discussion. And then we'll have some data on what predator management plans do. And so we'll have some data to have a discussion. We'll also be down the road a little bit on what Wes is doing. So I think it'd set a committee up in a much better place if we hold off. And that was the decision we made internally when we did the review.
For those that are acronym challenged like me, WAFWA is Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies.
And Canada, right? Darren, really, one question that the public asked us tonight was, do you have specific reasons to enter the predator management plan?
Yeah. So
and specific ones to leave it. It feels like there's specific goals to enter it,
right?
But how do we get out of it?
Yeah, the policy requires two things. They have to articulate why they're recommending it, and they have to recommend when they come out. So it can vary from unit to unit, but it does have to be defined in the plan, in each individual plan, what they'll be looking at. And to be honest, the biologists will use their best professional judgment on that. Sometimes it may not be obvious entering a plan, but they'll certainly take a stab at it and then evaluate it as time goes by.
And I'm not a houndsman, and I know one of them, and but it seems like one of their concerns is they don't know when it ends. And so how can the biologist and the division give out that information to the public so the public can say, okay, oh, this is going to end if these goals are met?
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I just go back to what I said before. I think it's really important that people build relationships with it's critical on these issues to build relationships with your district biologist and have those discussions on a local level. And I think we'll all benefit by that. So again, that'd be my recommendation. We've kind of gone both ways with lion. We went to ecoregions, and now we pushed it all the way to the other end to district biologists. So I like it better this way, and just would encourage houndsmen or whoever has an interest in lions to get to know their regional folks.
Ben.
Brock, probably the last one on the UHA ask that I think warrants some discussion is number 5, the move certain units from harvest objective to split season structure. That is something we can take action on, right?
I believe it
I
is,
see
yes.
Darren shaking his head yes.
Yep.
So I think that merits some discussion. I don't know where I land on that yet, but I think we could have a good discussion. Their point about targeting or focusing target by making it limited entry for a time, that's an interesting point for sure. So I'd like to hear other thoughts on that.
One of the points on this is it eliminated one of the hunt types, right? What hunt type does it eliminate? Is it the over-the-counter? What hunt type does this eliminate?
So we're kind of coming at it from opposite angles, but what we're recommending is that we would eliminate a split hunt and implement certain limited entry seasons on harvest objective units. I think what they're talking about is coming at it from the other way and eliminating harvest objective units and making all of those that aren't predator management limited entry. They'd have a limited entry season on the front. Obviously, we recommended our preference, but it would eliminate, both would eliminate the split hunt concept, although it would still, well, I don't know. Are you talking limited entry and the hunt would end, or they'd continue on? Yeah, so it'd just be the terminology that would go away. Just kind of depends on how you tackle it.
Refresh our memory on what the split hunt means.
So currently we call a split hunt a hunt that has a harvest objective set on it, but it has a limited entry season that opens at early in the season and then runs for a set period of time. Say there's 10 permits. 10 people could draw a permit for that unit. They're the only people that can hunt there for that period of time. And then at the end of that period of time, any unfilled permits then go harvest objective for the remainder of the season or until all 10 animals were harvested. So that's the split concept.
Okay, and then the Houndsman Association is recommending what instead? That's what they're asking?
So our recommendation, sorry, Matt Farnsworth, Utah Houndsman Association. Our recommendation was the harvest objective units that are currently not split and not in predator management. I believe there's 13, if I remember off the top of my head. Move those to a split structure. So the 280 available tags in those units would be forced to hunt the unlimited units where the division wants harvest. They can still have the same number of tags issued as the split season that would open later if the harvest wasn't met.
So Matt, stay right there for a second. So one of the things you mentioned in your letter advantage here is that that's going to target focus on those areas, whereas if it was just harvest objective, it would not necessarily.
So with the current harvest objective, everybody in the room can go buy a tag and go to these units that aren't in predator management but are harvest objective. If you move them to a split season, only half of the room could go there. And the other half of the room would be forced to go to the unlimited areas where the division wants a higher harvest.
And everybody wants to go to the harvest objective area first because that's going to close, and then they'll go to the unlimited areas later on. So those areas get hit really hard, and the unlimited areas don't get hit as hard.
Correct.
Okay, I think I had it backwards then. So you're saying this would focus target on, not on these areas that we're moving to the split, but on the other areas that are in predator
It
management.
would focus the harvest
Okay.
on the predator management areas.
Okay. And the other thing I see here is this then also creates a limited entry atmosphere for some of these hunts. And I imagine that that's probably another thing you're looking for that you're looking, I mean, I
That's
know there's a lot of
benefit-
people with a lot of points. Is that another
That's the
benefit to
benefit
this?
for our members is I take my 10 lion points, I get a quality hunt for the first couple months of the season. If I decide not to harvest, I know on this date, it's opened up and there's gonna be more people there.
Okay.
That's similar to what we did on the Ponsagons when it moved from harvest objective to the split.
How's limited entry Cougar Point Creek? I don't put in, so I don't know. Is it
Absolutely
pretty?
horrible.
Is it? Yeah. Okay. So that
It's not
actually.
hardly, I just bought a point this year, but I'm not sure why, because I can hunt the whole state.
So I'm not a houndsman. I'm not a lion hunter, but from the outside looking in a little bit, just I think this recommendation has some merit here. Like maybe there's downsides that I'm not seeing, but
Darren, why
see
don't
some
you
upsides
address
to
the downsides that we're not seeing?
I have a couple of concerns. I see what they're saying. I don't disagree with the concept. I'm nervous about one blanket solution across all harvest objective units. I don't think one size fits all on all of these units. There may be units in the state, for example, where we have depredation problems, where we'd like those landowners to be able to obtain a harvest objective permit and hunt the whole season. So I'd rather default to districts and regions making those decisions. Certainly discussions can happen, and if they want to implement a limited entry season on a unit, and all parties agree, I have no concern, but I am a little bit concerned about just doing it for everything that's currently harvest objective.
Darren, do you know off the top of your head some of those units that
There's a lot in the
fall into-
basin, just off the top of my head, but there may be others in the south where they would like to avoid that restriction.
It looks like the Ponsagon is one. And in the past, the Ponsagon, they weren't ever getting the harvest under the limited entry. And so then they went harvest objective.
We tried it both ways, and
Yeah.
harvest objective did more to help us reach our objective than limited entry hunting up front.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Mr. Chairman, maybe an approach we could take is just given the lack of resources for the rest of the state, but I believe we probably have the resources here for the central region. Maybe we could hammer this out on what regions might fit or what units might fit this ask within the central region and make a recommendation for central region units.
Rusty's probably not prepared for this at all. I'm not even sure what units we're talking about
Ben,
here.
I think the region all have a limited entry season. All the units that are under harvest objective have a limited entry season in the region. Corey told me that, so I'm going to
Okay.
take his word for it.
The West has 4 predator management.
Yeah, if they don't have a predator management plan on them.
So with that idea I just threw out there and it doesn't apply.
You just like ended it because it's already solved in the central region.
Well, we can talk about the West Desert West Range is harvest objective, so. And maybe that could lead the way to other tracks to look at. Yeah.
So is that Pilot Mountain? I mean, not Pilot Mountain, that's the Deep Creeks, the Deep Creeks.
I need my
Do the Deep
readers.
Creeks get hunted?
They should.
I know, but
It looks like it's the West Desert Mountain Ranges unit. Is that in our? Okay.
Well, if the deep creeks aren't getting hunted, then like this would force some hunters out there, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's kind of the idea here.
Yeah.
Or part of it anyway. I think this ask has a lot of merit to it. I don't know if we have. I guess that's where I'm lacking here. Is do we have enough information?
So I agree it has merit. What I'm concerned about is like the Ponsagont, where they tried for years and years and years to get their objective and they never reached it. So I'm not sure, I'm not sure that one size shoe fits all.
Because it almost appears that there's as many HOs with an LE on them as there are HOs harvest objective. I mean, just like a quick scroll. So
Okay, anybody want to act on this?
No.
To me, this is a great topic for the plan when they write the plan in a couple of years.
Yeah, that might be.
I'm not,
fair.
I'm personally not informed enough to know whether,
Yeah, like kind of where I'm going now. I like the idea of the plan, but that is 3 years out. Part of me is wondering if, is there room for a motion here to essentially recommend this change, but with discretion from the local biologist on the units? Darren, would that be appropriate, or are we too late in the game to go that route?
Certainly recommend it. Yeah, and we can see how the other RACs vote, and if it looks like it's going that way, we could certainly have something ready for the board. So that's your discretion.
the current harvest objectives with an LE, that's already an option, right? So it is already at the discretion of the biologist.
Yeah, yeah. So obviously the units that are currently set up that way would be our biologist's recommendation. But this is a perfect public process discussion. So.
I like the idea. I just don't have enough information to how to implement.
That's kind of how I am too. I like the idea, but I would like to hear the whole discussion.
I think it was a good opportunity to bring it up, but it needs to be fleshed out, maybe in a committee, and maybe with some additional data that comes together from this study and with these predator management plans. As the data comes in from that, I think that'd be a good opportunity to put it in play further down the road. But I'm inclined just to go with the division's recommendations at this point.
Yeah, Brock, I like your idea of pushing this to the plan. I do want to applaud the UHA though for their recommendations tonight. I think
I agree.
They were well thought out and I appreciate their input. So thank you guys.
Anything else that you want to discuss from what we've heard from the public, or what you've thought about, what you've talked with your constituencies about?
Yeah, how about some discussion on the spot and stock hunt dates, extending it from December 31st to coincide with the other hunt dates ending in June 30th. Thoughts on that? I think June 30th is what Darren suggested was the end of the season, or
I did think of a wrinkle while I was sitting there. So this is a director's action. So the director would need to change the dates. It's really a Greg Hansen question, but I would recommend you have the discussion and then we figure it out later. But it is sort of out of the purview of the RACs. It's something the director's already taken action on, like the predator management plans.
Is Greg on?
He's not, but Kyle is. And Kyle, I don't know if you want to weigh in if he's still with us.
I'm still here. Online.
I would probably just want to take some time to look over that, but I would agree with Darren that I think that's in the director's office's purview and something we can work through.
So it's up to you guys. I think the legislator put it in there so that people that were out big game hunting could, and they saw a lion, they could harvest a lion. But it maybe adds a new opportunity for a few cross-country skiers.
I think it adds an opportunity. If the remainder of the season goes until June and the harvest is so minimal anyway, I think it just gives folks an opportunity to carry a rifle and feel like they're going to have a chance at something. I don't know. I mean, it's
so you're saying there's a
hardly any worse
chance.
than deer hunting, right?
Yeah, and go out and get stuck.
Okay. Anyway,
I'll give a couple. I generally like the idea. I like the idea of the extended season, Yeah, being out in the spring, carry a rifle in case you see something. I really like that. Just playing devil's advocate a little bit. And I don't know if this would be an issue or not, but I wonder about, would this cause any issues with the spot and stock tags being available to harvest at the same time that we're running the limited entry hunts? Just thinking about an issue where a spot and stock tag shoots a lion over hounds is essentially what I'm getting at. I don't know if it's an issue or not, but it's something that jumps out at me.
Right. What if a bear hunter trees a lion?